morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. How are you enjoying your beautiful breakfast? Excellent. On behalf of Mayor Jim Watson, the Ottawa Board of Trade, and the Ottawa Business Journal, welcome to the Mayor's Breakfast. I'm Su-Ling Ching, and honored to be the President and CEO of the Ottawa Board of Trade, and I am joined this morning by my co-presenter, Mr. Michael Curran, the publisher of the Ottawa Business Journal, who you'll hear from later. He's getting a coffee refill. We're thrilled to be gathered here safely together in our beautiful City Hall in Ottawa. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We honor the peoples and land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. I'm thrilled to be here with you this morning. Thank you for sharing your time and your energy and passion for the growth and well-being of our community. Thank you for being fully vaccinated and making it easy for us to follow event protocols, including remaining masked unless eating or drinking, using the sanitizer, and keeping your hands to yourself. This is acceptable, the elbow shake. In this way, we can continue to gather safely together, and a big thank you to our team at City Hall for hosting us and keeping us all safe. And can I have a round of applause for these gorgeous Christmas decorations as well? So lovely. The Ottawa Board of Trade is the voice of business and key advocate for economic growth in our nation's capital. Our mission is to cultivate a thriving, world-class business community in Ottawa through leadership and partnerships. It is to that end that we are excited to welcome you, the business and community leaders of Ottawa, along with our honored guests, including our keynote, Roseanne Archibald, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. On behalf of our Board of Directors, I would like to express our appreciation to all of you for your collaboration, innovation, and resilience during these challenging times. We have a complex road to recovery ahead of us with many opportunities to build forward better. We pledge our commitment to continue to work together with you and our colleagues at every level of government to leverage private sector investment to grow through smart policy making. Meanwhile, we continue with programs that directly support business, including rapid test distribution and the promotion of the Post Promise to build our local business, consumer, and employee confidence. We have recently launched a new Buy Local Ottawa campaign called Put Your Money Where Your Heart Is, and we are asking each of you to get involved and support our local small and medium enterprises, many in the hardest hit sectors. This is a critical time for our business growth and in some cases their survival into the beginning of the new year. Your consumer dollar is powerful, so we encourage you to think global but act local. Stay tuned for a new ambassador program to be launched in December, making it easy for every Ottawa citizen and leader to tell the Ottawa story and to promote our fine city. Thank you to many local partners who've made these programs possible, including the City of Ottawa, Ottawa Tourism, Invest Ottawa, Acobia, RGA, and private sector partners like TCC and Trek City. To those of you who are active members of the Board of Trade, we thank you for your ongoing support on behalf of our business community. And if you are a future member of the Board of Trade, now is the time to join us as we contemplate our economic growth. Cassandra Walters is here from our team, and she'd be happy to speak to you about any of the benefits and programs. As we kick off this show, let's recognize the great organizations that support our speaker series. Our lead sponsor, Hydro Ottawa, our presenting sponsor, Algonquin College, Enbridge, Commissionaires Ottawa, La Cité, Rogers Communication, the Westin Ottawa, RBC, our global partner, Oakwood Designers and Builders, our speaker gift sponsor, Edmund Harden, and our coffee sponsor, Capital Office Interiors and Steelcase. I will say, Jeff, we appreciate your support through the whole year, but actually being able to have the coffee that you provide is great because it didn't work on Zoom. Yeah. Thank you to all of these sponsors. Can I have a round of applause for their support? And now I would like to invite today's presenting sponsor to the stage to say a few words, Ron Mclester, who is the Vice President, Truth, Reconciliation, and Indigenization from Algonquin College. Sorry about that. Please welcome Ron.
Wastajasli, Segu Agwegu, Diganadasaniangets. What I said was, good morning, everyone. My traditional name is Diganadaso. Before we get started, I'm just going to start a little stopwatch here on my traditional iPhone to make sure that I don't speak longer than I was told that I have here. So I'm fortunate to be able to stand up here and to represent Algonquin College and to just communicate our gratefulness and our pride in these relationships and the Mayor's Breakfast. I was also given an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the college, and I'm excited to do that just for a moment. Later this year, early next year in April, we will be beginning the college new multi-year strategic plan. And I'm really excited and proud about that strategic plan because of how much room we have made and how much we have included traditional Indigenous knowledge within that plan. And that inclusion goes right from the very front of it into the back of it, and the responsibilities are shared throughout that document with every member and every layer of our community. I'm really thankful to be working at Algonquin because I get to focus on 2 or 3 very important questions. The first of which is, what is reconciliation? The second of which is, what is indigenization? And I have another 2 or 3 minutes to talk about that, and so I'm just going to give you some of my thoughts about that. I'm not saying this is the thinking of the college. I'm not saying that this is the thinking of, my people or the rest of the Oneidas that I come from. This is just what's in my mind and some of the thinking and the ideation that happens during the large amount of time that I speak to myself. I've been wondering what reconciliation is. I've been wondering what reconciliation should be. We don't currently have a sort of adopted or accepted definition of reconciliation at Algonquin College yet, but I assure you we will be working towards that. I've decided for the moment in my own mind that reconciliation has to do with how we respond to a certain amount of traumatic and awful activities that took place here on Turtle Island. In our context, what took place here in Canada. And reconciliation becomes the way in which we respond to those atrocities relative to the Ungwahoe, the Anishinaabe, the original people of this place. And then I think about what is indigenization and who is indigenization for. And I think about what we're talking about when we use a word like indigenous. I think that we're trying to talk about a specific group of people relative to a specific place, relative to a specific period of time. And I don't know that we need to use an English word like indigenous to do that. In fact, I think by using an English word like indigenous, what we're doing is continuing to separate, segregate, and isolate sort of my people, quote unquote, from perhaps people like yours. And so then I started thinking about what indigenous might have been from a traditional context. I reflect on the first ceremony that my people were given, the Haudenosaunee, from our creator, Singwayat Dizu, we call it, Oneidas call it, Onutiagas call it, Diganahila Dunksal, I think Mohawks call it Ganyohanyo. And what's interesting about that ceremony is that the second part of it, we recognize the two-leggeds. We don't recognize the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Inuit, we recognize the two-leggeds. And so I would suggest to you for consideration that there was a traditional understanding of being more connected, being more similar, being more the same than we think about ourselves today. I mean, we drink the same water, eat the same food, and are warmed by the same sun. And I think that if we were to think about innovation as it relates to indigenous knowledge, we might consider a traditional way of looking at our relation and start seeing an indigenous identity perhaps much more ubiquitous than is currently used. I also think that indigenization has to do with the access and connection to our mother or to our traditional teachings. When I think about birds and bees and trees, they still have a direct line to those teachings. They still have a direct line to those instructions, and they continue to perform to those instructions, and so we thank them. I think that the second part of indigenization then becomes the realization that we have put in many artificial barriers and constructs that make it harder for us to have connection to those traditional teachings, that make it harder for us to connect to those traditional instructions. And indigenization could then be one part in accessibility to an Indigenous identity, but also dealing and coping with the artificial constructs we've created between us and those instructions. The last thing that I'll say is I was at a Board of Governors dinner last night, and one of the feedback from a session I did most recently was folks were worried about our focus and perhaps it being at the expense of other BIPOC communities like Black, people of color, Muslims, and different systemically marginalized or systemically oppressed groups. And my response was this: have you ever been to Mexico? If you were to wake up in Mexico, would you know you were there by the way the buildings look? Would you know you were there by the sounds of the music? Would you know you were there by the taste and the smell of the food? If the answer is yes to any of that, think now about those questions in this place. If you were to wake up anywhere on Turtle Island, let's say Ottawa or I don't know, Hamilton, would you know, based on architecture, sounds, food, and smells, that you were in Ungwahome territory? If the answer is no, then we have work to do. And I don't think people in Mexico would feel bad about being able to answer to those yes to those questions when they think about other systemically oppressed people. And so I think there is a responsibility for us in this place, in the Turo Wampum, Dish with One Spoon, Turtle Island, traditional place, to be considering our connection to those past, those traditional teachings, and how we implement them in a 21st century setting so that we can think about a better and collective future for all of us to come. So with that, I'm happy to share that's the kind of thinking that we're doing at Algonquin College, and I'm very thankful for the invitation to come up here and speak to you this morning. Yongo.
Thank you, Ron, for your comments and for your ongoing support. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium His Worship Mayor Jim Watson for his City Hall update.
Well, thank you very, very much, Suling. Chief, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à votre l'Hôtel de Ville. Welcome to your City Hall, and thank you for joining us in our COVID-restricted numbers. We had so many more people wanted to come and hear the Chief than we were able to accommodate, but we do want to follow those COVID protocols. This is our second to last edition of the Mayor's Breakfast for this year, and I want to thank our partners at the Ottawa Business Journal, Michael and his great team, and Su Ling and her small but mighty team at the Ottawa Board of Trade who do such great work. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. Les peuples de la nation algonquine habitent ce territoire depuis des millénaires et continuent aujourd'hui de l'enrichir par leur culture et leur présence. And the City of Ottawa honors the peoples and the land of Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation and all First Nations, Inuit and Métis elders, people and communities living in Ottawa. I'm pleased to welcome our guest speaker today, Roseanne Archibald, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And I also want to welcome my colleague, I know Glenn Gower is here, City Councillor for Stittsville. Thank you, Glenn, very much for joining us as well. I'll be introducing the Chief in just a moment, but this is an opportunity for me to give a quick update on things that are taking place at City Hall. And thank you, Ron, very much for those wonderful words from you and representing Algonquin College. As we head into December and the holiday season, and these decorations, our staff do a great job putting these up each and every year, I want to provide a quick update on a number of key issues that are of interest to, I believe, everyone in this room and in our city. I'm proud that Ottawa continues to have the highest vaccination rate for big cities in all of Canada. That's something we can be very, very proud of. We have now, I believe, over 88% have double vaccinated and 91% are single vaccinated. So we anticipate, certainly by the end of the year, we'll be at over 90% in double vaccination, which continues to keep us in the best vaccinated big city in Canada. And I thank our partners at Ottawa Public Health, our paramedics, and all of the other people involved, the hospital, first responders, and frontline workers. The biggest news, of course, last week was parents have now got a little bit of relief because there's now a Pfizer vaccine for those aged 5 to 11. And shipments started a week ago, and with an accelerated delivery schedule and plans for more than 2.9 vaccine doses for children to be shipped by the end of last week, enough to provide a first dose to every eligible child in Canada. And this is great news for the more than 24,000 COVID-19 vaccine appointments that were booked for kids just in Ottawa within hours of the system opening up. And just last Thursday, Councillor Keith Eglai, the Chair of the Ottawa Public Health, and my colleagues from the West End toured the Eva James Memorial Centre in Canada to see how well organized our public health nurses and officials and staff were in pulling it all together relatively quickly to open the next day. Yesterday, of course, we heard the news of 2 cases of the latest variant that potentially emanated from southern Africa. And those individuals came back from Nigeria to Ottawa, and they've been isolated. And I know they're in good hands with our officials from Ottawa Public Health. Now, many sectors of the economy, as you know, have been particularly hard hit. And I want to thank the Board of Trade and all the other business groups, Regroupement des Gens d'Affaires, the BIAs, the Invest Ottawa, film, tourism, live music industries. They've come together. I don't know if any of you saw on the news on Friday, we opened the Christmas Village at Lansdowne Park. Over 5,000 people there to see the Christmas tree lit up. I urge you to go and see some of these wonderful craftspeople from different parts of Eastern Ontario and Western Quebec at Lansdowne Park. Excuse me. And according to Stats Canada, Ottawa had the highest rate of people working from home in the country, with nearly half, 47% of all workers, performing their tasks from home from April to June. And approximately 55% of Ottawa's downtown jobs are in the public sector, and almost all public sector employees are working from home. So we need to work with the federal government to encourage those people who can come back to work safely to come back, not just to simply support local businesses, but to support the concept of a healthy downtown. Things are improving. The local unemployment rate was 5.4%, the best of the top 7 big cities in Canada, compared to 8.1% in October. So we're going in the right direction. And Ottawa's vacant space, office space, decreased in the third quarter of 2021 for the first time in 21 months. I'm proud of the many shop local campaigns. I've heard the radio ad, Su Ling, many times on different radio stations, and I know these efforts will be important to get the message across to you and to all of your friends and colleagues. Please shop local this year more than ever. You know, when you go out as a parent to find a raffle prize, a dinner for 2, or a basket for a Cancer Society fundraiser, you're not going to the door of Amazon or Costco. You're going to small stores on Bank Street, Saint-Joseph, Montreal Road, Navin Road. You know, all these local businesses have supported you for years. Now it's our time to support those mostly family businesses. Finally, just 2 other quick things. On Friday of last week, I was pleased to join my colleagues at the Saint Laurent OC Transpo Garage, where we launched our first ever battery electric buses. You may have seen them being tested. They'll be ready to transport people in January. We expect to have 450 electric buses on our streets by 2027, with the full fleet converted by 2036. And finally, later today, I was telling the Chief that we have the wonderful opportunity to launch the construction and revitalization work of the Chief William Commanda Bridge, formerly known as the Prince of Wales Bridge, to honor an Algonquin leader and part of the city's ongoing reconciliation efforts. Transforming the Chief William Commanda Bridge into an active transportation corridor for pedestrians, cyclists, and in the winter for cross-country skiing, to go from basically Westboro or Preston Street right down across the bridge into Gatineau. And finally, the city's budget will be debated on December 8th. I encourage you to talk to your councillors, ensure that they understand that we've got to continue to control spending and invest wisely your tax dollars. It's now my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Roseanne Archibald, the National Chief for the Assembly of First Nations. Je suis fier de souhaiter la bienvenue à Roseanne Archibald. Roseanne Archibald, as you can well imagine, is the National Chief, receives probably hundreds of invitations to speak. So we're very, very pleased, Chief, that you accepted our invitation, and we appreciate the competing interests you have all across the country where people want to hear you speak. Roseanne is a third-generation chief in her family with 31 years of experience in First Nations politics. Her leadership and a recognition of education as a priority that is essential to self-determination have been groundbreaking and historical for women and youth. Roseanne ran a successful consulting business for 9 years, specializing in negotiations and facilitation while providing advice and guidance to First Nation leaders and organizations. She returned to politics in 2018, becoming the first woman to be elected as Ontario Regional Chief, where she made positive changes, including the establishment of a Council of Elected Women Chiefs and a creation of an Economic Growth and Prosperity Table. In July of this year, Roseanne Archibald made history by becoming the first woman to lead the Assembly of First Nations. She's a multidisciplinary artist whose work focuses on political art, photography, music, as well as documentary short films that reflect her passion for social justice, political engagement, and community building. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and was the first member of her community to complete a master's degree in the humanities. She's been awarded the prestigious Canada 125 Medal for having, quote, made a significant contribution to Canada through her leadership, end quote. Roseanne has dedicated her life to serving and striving to create a better quality of life for future First Nations people. She's been breaking down barriers since she started her political career and represents a generational change, bringing diplomacy and encouraging unity in the First Nations political system. With a focus on improved relations with federal and provincial governments, she understands that positive and lasting change requires creativity and innovative thinking. It is my great pleasure to please welcome our esteemed guest speaker today, the National Chief for the Assembly of First Nations, Roseanne Archibald.
Morning, everyone. Wachie Masway, Roseanne Archibald, Natishnakas, Dagotagon, Washnakata Kochian. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you today. Bonjour à tous. First, I always want to acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it. And I want to acknowledge that I'm a guest here on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Nation. I know this is going to be broadcast later, so for those who are going to watch it, I want to also acknowledge them on the lands where they are. Miigwech, Mayor Watson, and the Board of Trade and the Ottawa Business Journal for inviting me to today's event. And all of the organizers who actually made this possible. I'm really grateful to be attending in person. Throughout the pandemic, we just have not had an opportunity to gather like this, and it's our, being vaccinated, and I'm a big promoter of vaccines, that allows us to begin to move forward again in a new way. But this pandemic has really impacted our lives on all levels, from our social connections, work, education, our home life, medical care, travel, and particularly our ability to gather in ceremony or to gather at events like this. But what we're learning from the pandemic is that from the First Nations perspective, it really is exposing those inequities faced by First Nations. And it really is showing the decades and decades of neglect that First Nations rights that have been ignored. So when you think about the pandemic and how First Nations are disproportionately affected, you're talking about, 20 people in a house in a remote community with one bathroom. And so when you think about the cases and you see them per 100,000, they're quite high compared to the rest of Canada. But this particular event is about economic reconciliation and moving from that place of inequity and equality to a place where we are on equal footing is, I believe, all of our mutual goal, that we all share that goal of having equity and equality for First Nations. And that comes down to one key piece, which is economic growth, wealth building, and prosperity. This is something that all First Nations want. First Nations economies are actually tied to their land rights and their title and their water rights. In fact, all of the wealth created in Ottawa, in Ontario, in Canada, actually is built on the land beneath us, the land that we stand on, the land that we build our homes and build our businesses on. And this land that we are on today was given to the Algonquin Nation by the Creator. And it comes with sacred responsibilities. But economic development has always been a part of First Nations culture. It's always been a part of our story and our development. And we have been successfully trading and building economies prior to contact for thousands of years. So before Canada became Canada, Indigenous peoples were the developers and creators of the economy. And what has happened over the last 150 years is that you've had the Indian Act introduced, which really removed Indigenous peoples from the economy as contributors, for example. But there have also been more genocidal and assimilation policies from Canada, and that has really further disconnected us as Indigenous people from our sacred inheritance, our lands and our waters, and therefore has really limited our ability to benefit from those lands. So I do want to say that economy is more than just making money. Healthy and resilient communities are tied to prosperity and wealth building. So being a part of the wage economy, for example, allows families and communities to build pride through a strong work ethic that has always existed in First Nations people. Further, when communities build wealth, they almost always reinvest excuse me, that wealth into local programs and services that encourage growth and independence. And so the cycle of health grows and continues. So ultimately, self-sufficient First Nations are self-determining nations. The biggest single problem facing First Nations is lack of economic opportunity, as I mentioned, because of that disconnection from land. But here are some statistics. Approximately 70% of First Nation communities are located nearly 50 kilometers from the nearest town or city, and many of them lack infrastructure. Often, if you look at the remote north of Ontario, they have a winter road, so they don't have a road connection year-round. They also have other transportation issues, and certainly connectivity is a large issue in First Nations. Many of them don't have good access to the internet in order to be a part of this building of the digital economy that we're seeing. And so, but there is hope, because we're in a time where, as the previous speaker talked about, people have an interest in reconciliation. And economic reconciliation is a big part of that discussion. So I also want you to know that Indigenous peoples and businesses contribute almost $32 billion to the economy in Canada. And it's expected that that will continue to grow. And it will actually begin to outpace the overall national economy. So the Indigenous business sector plays an important role in generating wealth and jobs for local communities, and some of those businesses are competitive from local to international markets. Economic empowerment of Indigenous peoples, communities, and businesses it's not just the right thing to do for First Nations, but it's the right thing to do for all Canadians. So as I get back to the issue around equality and equity, we really have to begin to have discussions around what I'm calling the healing path forward, where we guarantee equality and equity to First Nations. And when we begin to raise the level, the standard of living for First Nations, then it will really result in the growth of what's known as the gross domestic product. And it will also reduce the social costs that arise from keeping people in poverty. It will also protect the most vulnerable. It will empower women and youth, who are so very important to economic growth. And by fully understanding and actioning economic reconciliation, First Nation economies will translate into certainty for investments, as well as self-sufficiency and self-determination for First Nations. So when First Nations people are strengthened from an economic growth perspective, Canada's economy, its social fabric strengthens exponentially, from which we can all enjoy a prosperous country and society. And it will promote a fairer and stronger Canada for everyone. As I had mentioned, the Healing Path Forward is a document that we created during the election, and I've been advocating for this Healing Path Forward. And part of it has to do with where we are today. The recovery of thousands of our little ones across Canada, I know, is on the minds and on the hearts of many people. And the idea that that this happened in Canada, I know, is really hard for people to digest. And I think that it has created a sense of empathy and a sense of understanding, a sense of connection that hasn't existed before. And it's really incumbent upon us all to strengthen that connection and to take this opportunity to make Canada the dream that we want it to be, which is a fair and just society. And one of the things I always talked about when I was regional chief as well is the vision that I have. And so I always continue to hold this vision of happy, healthy children surrounded by the love and care of their parents and families, living in safe and vibrant communities. And I know that that is a goal that we all share. But I also wanted to tell you that the Assembly of First Nations really is working on specific projects and processes to examine how do we reach that vision. So, for example, we are actually proposing a national First Nations economic growth, wealth building, and prosperity table. And we're creating that in the same way that we did in Ontario, as an opportunity to talk about the path forward economically for First Nations. But it also, we also have this opportunity to rebuild with everybody else as we all come out of the pandemic. And for us, that table also has to talk about the funds that are required in First Nations to build economies. We require an entrepreneurship fund so that our entrepreneurs can be supported. We require a partnership fund so that we can build these larger projects with partners. And most importantly, we require an equity fund. This is always the biggest issue around First Nations economy building, is that because of the way the Indian Act is structured, it's hard to get the equity. So for example, if you own a house, you can take some of your equity out of that house, borrow against it. And so First Nations don't have this same way to build equity. So that's what that table would be about. But as Canada and the provinces and territories and cities like Ottawa move into a post-COVID world, First Nations really have the opportunity to reimagine, reignite, and seize these sustainable economic opportunities and systems that will contribute to building safe and vibrant communities and a more prosperous society, for everyone. But sustained investments, as I said, has to be a part of that growth. I did want to just share with you one story about my own experience as a chief in my community. I was a chief twice in my community. The second time that I got into office, our unemployment rate was at 85%, which sadly is still the norm in a number of our communities across Canada. And so how did we turn that around? Because today we have an unemployment rate that matches the Canadian rate. Thank you. It took many, many chiefs and councils beyond my term to build on that success, but the very first thing that we were able to do was reconnect ourselves to our land and to benefit from the land. So a forestry company came in and clear-cut an area that was very sacred to us, and when they did that, we had to stand up for the land and for our rights. And we ended up in a blockade with Tembec. They're a company that no longer exists. But with Tembec, we blocked this road. And I think sometimes when you hear about blockades, you often get into situations where you're in a zero-sum game, where everybody ends up losing. But we really saw this as an opportunity to not only protect that land, but to figure out how to reconnect ourselves economically to the forestry sector. And we signed our first major forestry agreement, which has been our largest agreement. It still has a value, an ongoing rotational value of $350 million over 20 years. And why I say it's rotational is because it's tied to the forestry management planning cycle, which is 20 years. So our first agreement was a 20-year agreement. And so that was the beginning of our rebuilding our economy and connecting ourselves into our territory. So now we also own a couple of hydro dams, run-of-the-river hydro dams. We actually own 3. We also own a solar farm as well, and we've just branched into mining. We're now seeking ownership in one of the nickel mines that's going into our territory, and we have certainly benefited from the gold mine that's close by. So you can see, just by my example, that any First Nation that can reconnect to their lands and can really find a way forward with partners, with industry, and with government can raise itself economically to the same standard that we enjoy in places like Ottawa. So I just wanted to say that, right now, as I said, we're in this unique time, and I really encourage all of you to contemplate ways that you can contribute to the creation of equity and equality for First Nations with your businesses or with whatever work that you're doing. Because the opportunity now rests at the local, provincial, and federal government levels to commit to these acts of reconciliation and to support the idea of First Nations self-determination. So the other thing I wanted to just go back briefly about our experience, and this is where I have a larger vision, and I know this vision is shared by many, is that First Nations are not only part of the economy that surrounds them, but that they are driving the economy that surrounds them, because that economy is driven by lands and waters, and those lands and waters, as I mentioned, are sacred gifts and responsibilities that First Nations have. So I would just want to conclude by saying there are many opportunities for us to build these partnerships and to engage with each other, with business leaders and entrepreneurs. So let's talk, let's plan, let's build a healthier, prosperous Canada for everyone. And I look forward to your questions. So miigwech, ninanaskamun.
Good morning, Chief. There we go. Oh my, booming voice. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing that message. I think we're in a room full of progressive, successful local business people. They look to innovation and change. They embrace this. Help us understand how people in the room, perhaps on a local level, can help further your economic vision of reconciliation.
The first thing that everybody can do is educate themselves on First Nations rights, on the true shared history of this country. And that, to me, is what this moment is about. When we started to recover our little ones in these unmarked graves in what I call the institutions of assimilation and genocide, I don't call them schools anymore. I went to many schools in different municipalities, and not one of them had a graveyard or children buried in them. And this moment has really created an opportunity for everyone to dig deeper and to find out more about what has happened to First Nations in Canada. And I think from that sense of understanding that you will build through your own research and your own inquiries is that it'll give you the basis of wanting to make the world better, not only for your children, but for all children, including First Nations children.
I think sometimes we could agree that economic prosperity is built over multiple generations. Similarly, maybe reconciliation will take time. We hope it's speedy, but perhaps talk about how your economic reality will play into future generations. Why is that economic reality, I guess, important to change future Indigenous generations?
Our children, like your children, deserve to have opportunities. And those opportunities, for example, I wanted you to know that up until, I'm trying to think, we're on our second generation of hockey players in my community, but our first generation kids are my nieces and nephews, and they're all grown up now with their own kids. But we started a hockey program for them that just wasn't possible to build without an economy. And so you had some parents who were able to put their kids in hockey, and but not all kids had that opportunity. And so our community built a hockey program for all children, regardless of whether your parents could afford it or not. And I remember those kids, those first generation of kids that were en masse going into hockey for the first time together, how it transformed their lives and how it helped them to build relationships with kids in the town, how it allowed them to have time to do something constructive with their time, so that they weren't, we say this a lot and it's true, they weren't getting into trouble, because they were busy playing hockey. And so to me, that's an example of what happens when you begin to build an economy. Is the community itself, through its wealth generation, created these opportunities for kids. And so that's one example. But I think more importantly, what we're building and what you are trying to build are those opportunities for, as your children age, that they can go to post-secondary, that they can get good jobs, that they can have economic independence. I mean, these are our mutual goals. And so I think that ultimately, I said in my speech that, building wealth is not about individual wealth in First Nation communities. It's about building wealth together and building those opportunities for our kids so that they have a sense of hope, that they can look to the future and see something bright, that they can see opportunities.
It's wonderful. Let's hope that generational change starts now. I'm going to check with our audience to see if we have any questions, Chief. Anyone's mind shot? I see some stirring. Oh, yes, over here. Thank you. To the questions about the cannabis industry and what views you might have on it as it pertains to Indigenous people.
I think the thing that we continue to work on is the ability of First Nations to utilize their sovereignty to develop their own pathways into that particular part of the economy. And there have been opportunities for some First Nation businesses to partner up in the cannabis industry. And those, I think, have been, I'm trying to think of Akwesasne, for example, who are actually producers. So they have an actual facility where they're growing cannabis. And that, to me, is an important part of that economy, not only in the retail, but that First Nations are connected into that part of the economy at all levels. And so one of the things that has to change is the legislation around that, because the legislation doesn't always recognize First Nations' inherent rights with respect to economic rights. And I know that that's something that was on the mind of my predecessor, and it's something that I'm also thinking about as well, and that we are trying to impact legislation and policy in that area in a positive way to create more opportunities for First Nation businesses.
Thank you, Chief. Yes, Steve. So Steve is asking for 3 actions that we all could take potentially this week to further your vision.
Read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the full report. It's quite a thick document, and I do recommend that you read that document. The second best thing you can do is pick up the booklet, which actually outlines the 94 TRC calls to action. And I carry that book with me. It's kind of like my mini Bible that I take everywhere, because I always want to think about which of these TRC calls can I work on today? What can I do as the national chief in relation to those 94 calls? So that would be one thing. The second thing that I would suggest is that you find a way to build a network with First Nation businesses. So do some research on compatible businesses. So for example, you mentioned cannabis. Reach out to somebody who's in or trying to get into the cannabis industry from a First Nation perspective and build that relationship. The third thing that is more specific is there is an actual call to action for economic reconciliation, and it involves having First Nations sitting on boards of directors, being a part of businesses in terms of management and key decision makers within businesses. And so we have so many amazing entrepreneurs and business people. We have the Canadian Council on Aboriginal Business, which has a directory of over 1,600 businesses that you can connect to, and look for people that you can include in your business or on your board that are First Nations. We have a lot of amazing people that you could access. So I would say those are 3 things.
Thanks for the question, Steve. Chief, I'm just going to take the podium and I'll thank you right there. Chief, if I could hold you at the podium, I just wanted to present this gift on behalf of our speaker gift sponsor, Eamon Harnden. Thank you so much for spending your time. As the mayor said, we can't even probably comprehend how many speaking invitations you get. So thank you for spending your valuable time with us, opening our eyes further to this issue and giving us some sense of how we can make some progress in this mutually agreed to issue. Thank you, Chief. Just a few housekeeping notes, and we'll wrap up here in a second. I did want to thanks again to Eamon Harnden. Jacques Guimont is here with us today. Jacques and the firm are doing some great work at informing people on employment, legal issues, and labor issues these days. They are so vital to what's happening in the local economy, so thank you for that. And a couple notes from OBJ as we wrap up. This is kind of my show and tell section. OBJ did just launch its annual giving guide. In fact, I think I saw Victoria Stewart in the room a few minutes ago. The giving guide is a annual publication. I would have brought it, but it's only being shipped to the city today. It's on corporate philanthropy. It's a great read with local profiles of charities. In fact, the cover story is An Undeniable Reckoning, which looks at groups such as the Orange Shirt Society that asks why Indigenous-led charities are not getting more support. So I encourage you to pick that up. You can see the digital edition at obj.ca. I think last time I was at the podium here, I mentioned a new project, somewhat new project with us called the Eastern Ontario Business Journal. We have published the latest edition. So this is almost like a sister publication to OBJ, focused on the territory from Kingston to Hawkesbury. And in this particular cover story, as you might see, is 49 power people. So 7 people from 7 different sectors across Eastern Ontario, sectors such as transportation, logistics, technology, tourism. Once again, you can visit obj.ca to get the digital edition. And last but not least, it's a bit of related to Eastern Ontario. We've just released, I guess officially this week, something called Stuff Made and Built in Eastern Ontario. It's a online website and printed publication, as you can see here, on manufacturing and building industries. It's being distributed to local high schools and colleges to encourage people to consider working in those industries, and I think we can agree that manufacturing's all on our minds a little bit more with the pandemic and the shortages that we've realized. There's a few copies, by the way, at the registration desk. And just generally, if you're a local business news addict like I am, please go to obj.ca for local business news. We have an increased number of YouTube videos as well as audio podcasts. You can listen to any of those audio podcasts on Apple, Google, Spotify, or whatever platform you're on. As we wrap up this morning, let's recognize our sponsors one more time. Our lead sponsor is Hydro Ottawa. Our presenting sponsor this morning is Algonquin College. Thank you very much to Ron Mclester, one of our 40 under 40, for speaking here today. Enbridge, Commissionaires, La Cité, Rogers Communications, the Westin Ottawa. Ross is over here with us. We had a beautiful evening at Westin 22 on the 19th, a beautiful room. Thank you for hosting us. RBC, our global event partner, Oakwood Designers and Builders, our speaker gift sponsor, Eamon Harnden, and our coffee sponsor, Capital Office Interiors and Steelcase. There he is right there. Big round of applause for our sponsors. So we're almost at the end of our event season at Ottawa Business Events, but I do want to bring your attention to two upcoming events. One is, I think, particularly important. It happens on Tuesday, December 14th at noon. It's called Ottawa's Economic Outlook. As the mayor indicated, the future of our downtown is somewhat in question as the federal government workers and other industries have departed, and we're eager to bring them back. So to bring focus to that issue, we're bringing in Mary Rowe, who's the president and CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute, one of Canada's leading thinkers on downtown cores. So again, that's Tuesday, December 14th at noon. We'll be at the Shaw Centre for the first time in, I don't know what, a couple years probably. Tickets are now on sale. You can go to ottawabot.ca. And as Mayor Watson indicated, there will be one more Mayor's Breakfast before we wrap up for 2021. And I'm very happy to announce that Minister Mona Fortier will be speaking, and maybe we'll hear more from her about the return to work, to office, that is, for federal employees. For all these, again, you can go to ottawabot.ca. On behalf of OBJ, the Board of Trade, and His Worship Jim Watson, thanks for joining us. Hope to see you very soon. Bye-bye.